العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Allahu Akbar, Allah alhamd. We will be starting, inshallah, our Tafseer class. So you're more than welcome to stay even if you're not registered and you want to learn a little bit of Tafseer of Juz' Amma, inshallah, you're more than welcome to stay. And for those, inshallah, who are auditing or taking the course as a credit, inshallah, we will start basically every Thursday, inshallah, at 8. So Isha is 7:45. So by the time we finish Isha and the Khatira at the end, we'll be starting, inshallah ta'ala. And I don't think there's any more online. We may have to make up one class that we missed when I wasn't feeling well a couple weeks ago. That may be online, but we'll talk about that later, inshallah ta'ala. So we're just waiting for the slides. No? Okay, no problem, inshallah. So please turn your, if you have masahif or your phones, to Surah Al-Mutaffifin. That's where we are right now, bi'idhnillah ta'ala. اللهم اجعل جمعنا هذا جمعا مرحوما واجعل تفرقنا من بعده تفرقا معصوما ولا تجعل فينا ولا منا شقيا ولا محروما اللهم تقبل منا إنك أنت السميع العليم وتب علينا إنك أنت التواب الرحيم. So last week we covered the second surah in the second cluster, Juz' Amma. Can somebody remind us what the second cluster, which surah it starts with, and what does the second cluster talk about? Well, you were here 2 weeks ago, right? Yeah. So what did we talk about 2 weeks ago? Very good, very good. So the second cluster of Juz' Amma, so we said the first one is the first 3 surah, from Surah An-Naba to Surah Abasa, and that talks about the 3 essential components of faith, Tadayyun, Deen. Can somebody remind us what Deen means? So it might be on the exam. Yes. So that's exactly one of the meanings, absolutely. I'm talking more of like the general term, which means that, so go ahead. Yeah, you feel that you recognize a greater power, and that you have, because you recognize that greater power, and of course in Islam it's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then once you recognize there's a greater power, then you automatically, obviously, that with that comes a duty and a responsibility to that greater power, right? That's the general meaning of tadayyun, and of course we use that word to reference religion, and Islam is a form of tadayyun, right? And so somebody who doesn't have deen, somebody who doesn't feel that they have a duty or responsibility to anyone, right? They don't believe in anyone as a greater power. So that's the first 3 surah. I'm not going to, we don't have too much time today because Surah Al-Mutaffifin is quite long. The second cluster, which talks about the concept of choice. And we said that different surah can come and talk about the same topic from different perspectives, right? So we all know, for example, that the story of Sayyidina Musa is the most frequently mentioned surah or mentioned story in the Quran, right? I think every single juz'u in the Quran includes the story of Sayyidina Musa. And even when we go into the details of that story, how many times do you come across Sayyidina Musa facing off with the magicians, right? Several times. Does that mean it's just repeating it for the sake of repetition? And the answer is no. There's a specific element of that story, the way Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes it, that's unique to that surah, that feeds to the theme of that surah, right? And so, for example, Surah Taha, right? And I'm sidetracking a bit just so that we can try to understand context. Jazakallah khair. Surah Taha talks about the story of Sayyidina Musa facing off with the magicians, right? But when the magicians threw, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes it as فَأَوْجَسَ فِي نَفْسِهِ خِيفَةً مُوسَى. So Sayyidina Musa felt fear in his heart, right? Fear in his heart. It's talking about an emotion. The beginning of Surah Taha, Taha, ما أنزلنا عليك القرآن لتشقى. We did not send down the Quran onto you so that you are distressed. An emotion, right? Context of the surah is very important. Versus Surah Al-Qasas, when it describes the face-off of Sayyidina Musa alayhi salam and the magicians, and it and it talks about it, and the way it's described is that Sayyidina Musa threw his staff with confidence. But we just said he had fear in his heart. Because Surah Taha is talking more of an internal state. Surah Al-Qasas talks about it from a third person point of view. So people saw him with confidence. Why? And Surah Al-Qasas talks about the liberation of a people. Right? So there's strength in that. And so you have to understand the context. The context of each of these surah in the second cluster of Juz' Amma that starts off with Surah Al-Takwir. We talked about that 2 weeks ago. And Surah Al-Takwir talked about the sanctity of the human's ability to choose. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala willed for us to choose, to have free choice. That's not given to anybody, by the way. That's just humans and jinn. And so that's a blessing, but that comes obviously with a responsibility. And so, excuse me, I'm still trying to get over the cough, subhanAllah. And so last week, we talked about Surah Al-Infitar. And Surah Al-Infitar talked about the accountability that comes with that choice. So yes, you do have the ability to choose, you have the freedom, but that comes with accountability. You will be accountable for what you choose. And that's Surah Al-Infitar. Inshallah, today we're going to talk about a third perspective about choice. And that is your choices are recorded and they come with consequences. And by the way, consequences are not just akhirah, they're also dunya. We'll talk about that in Surah Al-Mutaffifin, bi'idhnillah ta'ala. So that's what we're going to be covering today, bi'idhnillah ta'ala. Before we start reading it, Surah Al-Mutaffifin that's the most common name for the surah. Other Tafseer have called it Surah Wailul lil Mutaffifin, the first ayah. Now there is I think the stronger opinion is that the surah is Meccan surah. It was revealed during the Meccan period due to the ayat and the description. So you can read a surah and without really knowing if it was revealed in Mecca and Medina based on its style, based on its content, what it's addressing, you can guess if you didn't know where it was revealed. Because if you take Ulum al-Quran, which is another course that's offered in the IDA, we talk about what's the difference between Meccan and Madani surah. But for the most part, scholars have said this is a Meccan surah. Some other scholars have said it's a Madani surah because it's talking about a tatfif, which I'll talk about in a moment, and that was prevalent in Medina. Tatfif is basically is a form of taking advantage or a double standard. Again, I'll talk about that in more detail. And some said, scholars that said it's Meccan, said that it's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed it during Mecca in preparation for people to go to Medina because this practice of tatfif was very prevalent in Medina. Some said it's prevalent in Mecca, and some said that it's actually Medina with the last 8 ayat being Meccan. Now, the strongest opinion is that it's Meccan. I'm just kind of laying to you the different opinions so that you have an appreciation of what the scholars are saying. And that's because I'm not just picking on one tafsir, I'm looking at different sources and trying to share those with you for the most part. Any questions so far? Okay. So we talked about, this surah is going to address that, our choices are going to be recorded, and they're going to be recorded in the most detail. Okay? And these details will all be revealed to us on the Day of Judgment. To the point where, even if we deny them, our limbs will testify before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala about what we did. Right? And there's several ayat that talk about this. That on the Day of Judgment, that these limbs, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will tell the mouth to be sealed, and then the limbs will speak on the behalf of the person if they're lying, and they will reveal the details. And so, unless people realize, and this is what you see in dunya, most people may you know, they, for the most part, if you believe in the last day, you obviously, and you have a strong conviction of the last day, you will do your best. You know that your actions are recorded because you believe in the last day, right? That means you're going to be taken into account. And this is where I think it's important that we recognize, unless people realize that they have to be taken account for every deed that they did in this world, they will not be ethical in every single thing they do in their daily lives. Because there will be a time where you're going to be put under pressure to do something, and you're going to pick, I'm not saying you, but I'm saying in general, the person will pick the easy way out or something that will bring them benefit. And even if it's small. And so this is why it's extremely important that we talk about the concept of everything is recorded and there are consequences to these actions. Okay? Because if we don't have that as a true belief, we may do things from time to time that don't consider that point. And that's not in our favor. And that could be whether it's business related or school related or what have you. Okay? So let's start reading the surah بإذن ta'ala. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. ويل للمطففين الذين إذا اكتالوا على الناس يستوفون وإذا كالوهم أو وزنوهم يخسرون ألا يظن أولئك أنهم مبعوثون ليوم عظيم يوم يقوم الناس لرب العالمين. Okay, so we talked about how the surah is emphasizing the recordings of actions and the consequence of those actions. The surah begins with an example, and then it talks about the main theme, and then it goes into and ends with another example. Okay, so there are two examples, one at the beginning, one at the end, and in between is where it talks about the theme. The surah starts with wail. The word wail is a warning to someone. Okay, when you say wail, ya wailak, warning to you, right? Some scholars have also said that wail is a location in the hellfire. It's one of the deepest parts of the hellfire. Okay, wail is for, this location is for al-mutaffifin, or it's a warning, wail, a warning to al-mutaffifin. Now, what does mutaffifin mean? Okay, tafafa means somebody is making something little when it's not little. Somebody's making something little when it's not little. And so mutaffifin are people who change the substance of something and they make it less than what it really is. So these are the people that do that. Now, just before we kind of talk about that in a bit more detail, a-tufafa is when you fill a bag with things, and you know at the bottom of the bag there's still space. You know when you buy chips, there's still space at the end, right? Now, if you're selling based on, that's the empty space, essentially, is what we're talking about. Now, when in Arabic language, how they used to buy and sell and trade, they used to do it either by the scale, mizan, right? So you put your grain or rice on one side, and then you put weight on the other side, or coins or whatever, right? And when it balances, that's the price. The other way they used to sell is they used to have a standard size of something. So this is, let's say this is 1 liter, for instance, okay? And so you fill that standard size, and you know that this is in a liter, so based on that standard size that's filled, that's how much it costs, okay? So how many of these standard sizes do you want? I want 3 of them. Okay, so therefore you owe this much, okay? That's how they used to do buying and selling, measurements, if you will. Now we have packages that say 343 grams or 500 mils, right? So that's, keep that just in mind, because that's, tufafa, what it means. Now, when in Arabic language, when you can have the same word expressed a little bit differently with a ta, that could mean, it changes the meaning. So when we say ba'a, ba'a, what does ba'a mean? Sell. Somebody is selling. Somebody, ba'a, something, right? Ibta'a means somebody bought something. So ba'a is somebody selling. Ibta'a, somebody is buying. Okay? Like ishtara. What does ishtara mean? Somebody buying. Shara, somebody selling. Okay? So somebody who's doing something to you, it doesn't have the ta in it. Okay? If you're doing the action, it has the ta, right? So if you're buying is ishtara, somebody selling is shara. Now why do I say that? Because this surah talks about mutaffifin, which I'll talk about in a second. الذين إذا اكتالوا على الناس يستوفون وإذا كالوهم. So اكتالوا and كالوا. كالوا and اكتالوا. Okay? So اكتالوا is when you are making a transaction with someone and you want your full measure. You want your full right. الذين إذا اكتالوا على الناس يستوفون. So if they're in a transaction, and so people usually use this ayah to talk about just trade, like buying and selling. But it's not just buying and selling, it's any trade. Anything you do, that when you do it, you expect the full measure. You expect people to give you your full rights. Is that bad? It's not bad. So الذين إذا اكتالوا على الناس يستوفون. So if they're seeking something, if they are buying something, or if they are in a transaction with someone, they want their full measure. No problem. The problem is وَإِذَا كَالُوهُمْ. But now if those people are offering something to somebody else, أَوْ وَزَنُوهُمْ يُخْسِرُونَ. So if they, again, in a transaction, كَالُوهُمْ أَوْ وَزَنُوهُمْ, so or they weigh. So this is why I say this is not just buying and selling, because buying and selling is with weighing. اكتالوهم could be any transaction. And so when they're in that transaction that they're offering somebody something, what do? They don't offer the full measure. They take less. They give less. So when they seek something, they seek their full rights. They seek full measure. But when they are now giving something to somebody, they yukhsirun. They give less. We call that double standard. These ayat are talking about a double standard. Okay? So many examples. So, for example, you want your child to act a certain way, to memorize Quran, but you don't. You don't. That's a double standard. Right? You want your wife to treat you, or husband, your spouse to treat you a certain way, but you don't treat them in a specific way. That's a double standard. Right? Somebody who, for example, and this happens a lot, somebody who is, in a prohibited relationship. He's got a girlfriend, but then he sees a sister with someone, he gets really upset. Double standard, right? You accept that for yourself, but not for anybody else. Right? It could go as small as so and so parked illegal, on Jum'ah the wrong way, and we're all over that person, but then we park the same way at a different time. So you expect that people fulfill, a specific duty, or you get your full rights from them, but when it's you, no. So you don't accept that somebody dishes out insults against you, but you're willing to dish out insults against them. You're not willing for people to talk behind your back, but you talk behind people's back. Double standard. These ayat, al-mutaffifin, is a double standard. Okay? You stand up for justice. We have the Palestine issue. We expect people of all walks of life to come join us. Great. But then when those people have injustices, we sit home. Why? This is double standard. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, wail, warning, or a special place in the hellfire for these people. وَيْلٌ لِلْمُطَفِّفِينَ الَّذِينَ إِذَا اكْتَالُوا عَلَى النَّاسِ يَسْتَوْفُونَ وَإِذَا كَالُوهُمْ أَوْ وَزَنُوهُمْ يُخْسِرُونَ. So Allah says, أَلَا يَظُنُّ أُولَٰئِكَ أَنَّهُمْ مَبْعُوثُونَ. Do those people not think أنهم مبعوثون, that they're going to be resurrected. They're going to be resurrected and asked about their choice. This is a choice. ليوم عظيم. They're going to be resurrected to a magnificent day. يوم يقوم الناس لرب العالمين. On the day that people يقوم الناس. What does يقوم mean? Stand. What does that mean, stand, in this context? Is it standing physically in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? It means that you have to answer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Your actions, you're going to have to stand up. Yes, you will be standing before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala physically, but what this means is you're going to have to answer for what you've done. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, أَلَا يَظُنُّ, they don't think that they're going to be resurrected to a day and they're going to have to basically justify their actions to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is the opening of Surah Al-Mutaffifin. And so we talk about this double standard of transactions. Watch out for that. This is one of the problems we have in our ummah. We expect when we're dealing in any business deal or any discussion or dialogue that people give us our rights, but when it's our turn, we don't. We fall short, and that's a problem. And that's a choice. Double standard is a choice. And if we apply it to an ummah level, you will see the problems that we have as an ummah, because I'm sure all of us have come across this issue in our society. So when we read the Quran, or when we look at the Quran, we need to look at the Quran, and oftentimes, unfortunately, when we read it, and the terms mutaffifin or kuffar or taghin or anybody that's doing something wrong, we're not learning Quran so that we can understand, okay, these are what the wrong people are doing, and so we can lecture people about them and say, this is not us, this is somebody else. We read the Quran, we have to look at the meanings and apply it to ourselves. It's important because the last part of the surah emphasizes that. Because that's also tatfif. You take the Quran, you command people to do right and stay away from wrong, but then you don't take it for yourself. That's double standard, right? And so we need to focus on ourselves first, and we'll come to that point at the end because that's how the surah ends. Bidnillah ta'ala. You will answer, and I will answer for what we do, and everything is that we unfortunately participate in. If we show any double standard, it's something that we have to answer Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with. So let's continue بإذن ta'ala. كلا إن كتاب كلا إن كتاب الفجار لفي سجين وما أدراك ما سجين كتاب مرقوم. So kalla we talked about before. Remember, kalla doesn't necessarily mean no. It also means indeed, for emphasis. Right? And it could also mean that to either emphasize the meaning indeed, or we can also use the word no, and what this would refer to as no, the practice of the mutaffifin is not right. Right? Is not right. No, kalla, that's not the correct action or behavior to take. And then, inna kitab al-fujjari lafi sijjin. Indeed, the book of al-fujjar is in sijjin. Now let's explain these words. We talked about fujjar before. We talked about it, I think, last week and in Surah Abasa. What does fujjar mean? Fajr. Nobody remembers. Uncomfortable silence. I will wait. I don't want this to be one way, guys, right? So I want some participation, inshallah ta'ala. So what does Fajjar mean? Guess, if you don't know, guess. Yes. Yeah, so the word fajara is alluding to a code of conduct, right? So it's people who have poor code of conduct. And we talked about Surah Abasa. So the surah talks about the standard of code of conduct that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala set for us, right? Talked about the story of Sayyidina Muhammad when he frowned, right? Nobody saw him, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala still mentioned it to remind the Prophet and to teach us all that there is a standard that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala expects from us when it comes to akhlaq, when it comes to behavior, when it comes to code of conduct. So fujjar is somebody who has poor code of conduct. Okay? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala here is talking about al-akhlaqiyya, the behavior, not the belief, but the behavior. Of course, belief is important, but this is now more of a generic term. So the book of people who have poor code of conduct is in Sijjin. Sijjin comes from the word sajan. What does sajan or sijn mean? Prison or jail, right? So the book of Al-Fujjar is in Sijjin. So it's a storage place. It's a storage place. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَمَا أَدْرَاكَ مَا سِجِّينَ. And what do you know of Sijjin? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is asking this rhetorical question. And what do you know of Sijjin? The answer is Kitabun Marqum. A book that is marqum. Marqum comes from raqam. Raqam could mean numbers, but it also means to write down. Am hasibta anna ashab al-raqimi, right? Kahfi wal raqimi in Surah Al-Kahf. Right? They had written basically their belief on a piece of material. So ashab al-raqim. Raqam means to write. So Kitabu Marqum is a book that is written. A book that records everything. What does the surah, did we say talk about? What does it talk about? No, so the concept of choice, right? Everything is recorded and there's consequences to choices. All your choices are recorded and there's consequences to your choices. Okay? Remember, Surah Al-Takwir, you have a choice and it's sacred. Surah Al-Fitar, with that choice comes accountability. So now you not only do you have it, because again, we may take it for granted, that we have choice. And yeah, we know we have a choice. Actually, if you look at science and the books out there, everybody talks about this concept of choice. Do you actually have choice, or are you a product of your environment, of your genetics? Are you do you have a predisposition to do something? Is this part of your fate that you're forced to do something? All these questions about choice. Islam came and to clear the matter, because after belief, there's a purpose why you're here. There's a standard of akhlaq you have to meet, and there's something in particular that you need to understand that would lead you to Allah, i.e. your nafs. After explaining the three essential concepts, now you have to know this concept of choice. There's no sense in talking about halal and haram without talking about the fact that you have a choice in the matter, right? Otherwise, you can claim it's not fair. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying you have a choice. You'll be accountable for your choices, and in the surah, they're going to be recorded, and there's consequences. Okay? So again, the high level meaning of what the surah is talking about is very important. And here's where it highlights the recorded part. Kitabun Marqum. Everything's going to be recorded, and everything is stored. For the Fujjar, it's stored where? In a place called Sijjin. It's stored. You can't access it. You can't go and delete it, change it. Nothing. It's stored. And it's waiting to be distributed on the Day of Judgment. Kitabun Marqum. So let's continue, inshallah ta'ala. وَيْلٌ يَوْمَئِذٍ لِلْمُكَذِّبِينَ الذين يكذبون بيوم الدين وما يكذب به إلا كل معتد أثيم إذا تتلى عليه آياتنا قال أساطير الأولين. So, Kitabu Marqum, everything is recorded. And by the way, yes, saying it is easy to say, and we can nod and say, okay. But has anybody here done taxes, their own taxes? Done taxes? For a business or just personal, like employment? If you've done it for a business, okay, the CRA expects you to file your taxes every year, right? Now, as a business, or even as an individual, as an employee, you know that you have to report what's coming in and what's coming out, particularly for a business, right? Now, the CRA wants just to make sure that they know that it's not to the exact cent. It's not to the exact dollar. There are things that you may be, assuming, guessing, attributing. There may be, again, some details that in the big picture, the big grand scheme of things, in accounting, it's never perfect, as you may have known, right? And so when you file your taxes, on a high level, what's coming in, what's coming out, and you pay taxes on what's left. And if you've done your taxes, you know how hard it is to account for every penny. Your book that everything is recorded in records every penny, records every deed. ما لهذا الكتاب لا يغادر صغيرة ولا كبيرة إلا أحصاها. This book records everything, no matter how small or big. Everything is accounted for, right? Everything is accounted for. And so this section starts, وَيْلٌ يَوْمَئِذٍ لِلْمُكَذِّبِينَ. Wail again. So many times in the Quran, the word wail, a warning. Which surah has the most number of wails? Does anyone know, by the way? It's one of the trivia I like to throw out. No? That's فَبِأَيِّ آلَاءِ رَبِّكُمَا تُكَذِّبَانِ. Mursalat, right? وَيْلُ يَوْمَئِذٍ لِلْمُكَذِّبِينَ, which is actually this ayah here. Wail, again a warning. يَوْمَئِذٍ لِلْمُكَذِّبِينَ. Wail the warning is for al-mukaththibin. Mukaththibin comes from the word takdhib. What does takdhib mean? Yes. Right, so not just to lie, but it's that you recognize the truth, but you deny it because it doesn't align with your personal agenda or your desires. So you know that this is the truth, but you deny it quickly, or you justify you're not going to take by it. Takdhib. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, وَيْلُ يَوْمَئِذٍ لِلْمُكَذِّبِينَ. A warning to those who practice this takdhib. Takdhib in what? That they know they're going to be responsible for their deeds, their actions. They know deep down inside that there's going to be a responsibility there, but they deny it. Why? Because it's easy on the conscience, on your conscience. It's easy on your conscience to say, if I don't think about it or if I reject this concept, I can do whatever I want and I won't be held accountable. But when that's on your conscience, it's difficult. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, wait for those who reject this accountability, that everything is recorded in the Kitab al-Marqum. وَيْلُ يَوْمَئِذٍ لِلْمُكَذِّبِينَ الَّذِينَ يُكَذِّبُونَ بِيَوْمِ الدِّينِ. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala even says, and they reject, they know the truth, but they reject يَوْمِ الدِّينِ, the day of deen. And like the sister mentioned earlier, deen could mean accountability. So when we say dana nafsahu, it means that somebody held themselves into account. So the day of accountability. So deen essentially means the standard that you hold yourself to and that you're going to have to answer for on the day of judgment. Okay? So Yawm ad-Din is the day of accountability with respect to the rules of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَيْلٌ يَوْمِذٍ لِلْمُكَذِّبِينَ الَّذِينَ يُكَذِّبُونَ بِيَوْمِ الدِّينِ وَمَا يُكَذِّبُ بِهِ إِلَّا كُلُّ مُعْتَدٍ أَثِيمٍ. And the person who applies takdhib, there are two characteristics mentioned. Mu'tadin Athim. Mu'tadin Athim. These have to do with akhlaq. Just like fujjar, code of conduct, how you carry yourself. Mu'tadin Athim has to describes behavior. Mu'tadin is somebody who harms others. Somebody who harms others. So it's you and your relationship with against other people. So if these people believed in accountability, they wouldn't have harmed others. They wouldn't have harmed others. Otherwise, if they denied accountability on the day of accountability, no point. Yeah, I can harm others. I don't have to answer for that. So mu'tadin is harming others. Athim is somebody who harms themselves, i.e. they get themselves into sin, which really means you're transgressing against not people, but Allah. So mu'tadin is you're transgressing against people. Athim comes from ithm, right? Sin. You're transgressing against Allah. So somebody who has these two characteristics are who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is describing to be of those who reject accountability. And so if somebody has 100% conviction of accountability on the Day of Judgment, then they wouldn't be mu'tadin and they wouldn't be athim, because they know they have to answer for those. Really, and this is why I want to emphasize this point, is that I think one of the remedies for us, if we are in a tail, if a whirlwind of repeating something that we shouldn't be doing, a mistake or a sin or what have you, we really need to focus on this concept of accountability and the day of accountability. Try to break the cycle. I'll talk about the cycle in a second, actually. Ayats are coming to talk about that, inshallah ta'ala. So when you say, for example, you have to look at the consistency of your actions with your words. This is one way to measure how much conviction you have in the Day of Judgment. So when you say إِيَّاكَ نَعْبُدُ وَإِيَّاكَ نَسْتَعِينُ, every salah, right? 17 times a day at least. What is إِيَّاكَ نَعْبُدُ وَإِيَّاكَ نَسْتَعِينُ? Right. So that's a claim that we're making, right? And we know the hadith, the Prophet ﷺ, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when you read Surah Al-Fatiha after every ayah, Allah responds, right? So when we say إِيَّاكَ نَعْبُدُ وَإِيَّاكَ نَسْتَعِينُ, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, هَذَا بَيْنِي وَبَيْنَ عَبْدِي. This is between me and my slave. Let's see if you're honest with that. Let's see if you're truthful with that. So if we're making a claim and we have 100% conviction of the Day of Judgment, then our actions will match our claims. And if we see ourselves that we fall short between our actions and our claims, then we need to fix ourselves. Okay? And maybe that comes with, perhaps there's not 100% conviction. It's not black and white. You believe in Day of Judgment or you don't. Yes, you may believe, but deep down inside, is that factored into every decision you make, every choice you make? Okay? So, وَمَا يُكَذِّبُ بِهِ إِلَّا كُلُّ مُعْتَدٍ أَثِيمٍ إِذَا تُتْلَى عَلَيْهِ آيَاتُنَا قَالَ أَسَاطِيرُ الْأَوَّلِينَ. So when our ayat, whether it's Quran ayat or they're shown signs around them, whether it's signs of creation or that signs Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sends to them, if they see these signs or they're reminded of the signs of the Quran, you can take either meaning. إِذَا تُتْلَى عَلَيْهِ آيَاتُنَا. How do they respond? قَالَ أَسَاطِيرُ الْأَوَّلِينَ. They say these are fables of old, or of the ages. أَسَاطِيرُ الْأَوَّلِينَ. Why? Because when you say, oh, accountability, Day of Judgment, oh, that's something we heard in stories. Again, denial, because they don't want to be taken into account. Now reflect on the point that if things were not recorded, if your actions and your sayings and your thoughts are not recorded, think about how you would behave. And that's for everyone to reflect, by the way. Okay? Think about how you'd behave. So that's if you knew nothing was recorded, right? That's kind of just to highlight, to say this whole percent conviction thing. Yeah, I may believe in the Day of Judgment, but deep down, am I basing my decisions on my accountability or not? Again, that's for you to answer and for me to answer, for reflection. But if you take that out completely and say, nope, nothing's recorded, how would you react then? How would you behave? Right? So Now play it the other way, 100%. If you had 100% conviction, how would you behave? And they'll be different for most people. Let's continue, inshallah ta'ala. Okay, so we got to which ayah now? 14. كلا بل ران على قلوبهم ما كانوا يكسبون. كلا إنهم عن ربهم يومئذ لمحجوبون. ثم إنهم لصالو الجحيم. ثم يقال هذا الذي كنتم به تكذبون. So now we come to the second part, the second point we're trying to make. The first one is everything's recorded. And you're going to be taking into account for everything that's recorded. Okay? Now we talk about the consequence. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Kalla. Again, it could mean indeed, or it could mean to negate what people were saying before, that this whole concept of accountability is just fables, tales of old. Kalla, no, that's not correct. Okay, that's not correct. Kalla. Bal is a very powerful word in Arabic. Bal means actually it's completely the opposite, or it's completely different than what they believe. Just the word bal has a very strong intonation. كلا بل ران على قلوبهم ما كانوا يكسبون. Rana means literally that you're staining something. It's a stain. Rana على قلوبهم. Their hearts are stained. بما كانوا يكسبون. For what they used to earn. يكسبون is more general than يعملون. Anything you earned with your actions. So it could be your actions, your statements, anything that you earned with your behavior. Everything you do, everything you think about, everything you speak has an impact on your heart. كلا بل ران على قلوبهم. Their hearts are stained by that which they used to earn. So the consequences, are we talking about Day of Judgment consequences right now? These are not Day of Judgment. These are dunya consequences. So our choices have consequences in dunya. We know that. But we know that the consequences, and I don't mean consequences because we know that if you drive recklessly, very quickly, and you get into an accident, you can't just say, قَدَّرَ اللَّهُ مَا شَاءَ فَعَلَ. I got into an accident. Oh, Allah wrote for me this accident. No. Of course, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knew that it was going to happen, but this is because of your decision, your choice to drive recklessly. There's a consequence to that, right? We know that. We know that there's consequences to our actions. What I mean here is these consequences go beyond just the result, the immediate result. They have an effect on our hearts, on us. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, Ran, they stain our hearts. The Prophet ﷺ said, إن العبد إذا أخطأ خطيئة نكتت في قلبه نكتة سوداء. That if a servant of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commits a sin, a black mark or a dot appears upon their hearts. If they abandon the sin and they seek for forgiveness, the heart will be polished, it will be cleaned. And if he or she returns to the sin, the blackness will increase until it increase until it blackens the whole heart. It covers the whole heart. The Prophet ﷺ described it. حتى تعلو قلبه وهو الران. That the heart is covered with all these black spots until it's completely covered, and that is the ran. That is the stain. And then the Prophet ﷺ said, quoted the ayah, بل ران على قلوبهم ما كانوا كلا بل ران على قلوبهم ما كانوا يكسبون. Everything that they used to earn has an impact, and it stains their hearts. And it's obviously referring to evil deeds, because it's referring, again, we're talking about people who are fujjar, right? We're still talking about fujjar, people of low or poor code of conduct, the people whose books are in Sijjin. Their hearts will have a stain. And this is extremely important to talk about, because when you see people justify the genocide in Gaza right now, say, how do people justify? How do people just explain and not see all these kids and families and all their homes destroyed and all these deaths? And they're justifying that this is, self-defense, right? You say there's no humanity in these people. Iran, the stain covers the heart to a point where people stop recognizing right from wrong. That's a consequence. And that Ran comes from our actions, our choices. So eventually, our choices can cover our hearts that would lead us to be completely blind. إنها لا تعمى الأبصار ولكن تعمى القلوب. It doesn't blind the eyes, it blinds the hearts. If the heart has a stain over it, the light of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not enter it, can't enter it. It's stained. It needs to be polished. And so that heart can't see. Allah describes it as the heart can't see, not the eyes. The heart can't see. It can't see right from wrong. And so, you might think, how do people not see it? There's a stain over the hearts. And by the way, we have to be careful, because how often do we see, for example, the rubble falling on children and they get killed, and we can't sleep at night. And then the second day we see it, it still hurts, but not as much. And then we see it every day, and all of a sudden, we're numb. We're numb. Why are we numb? There's a stain over our hearts. Our inaction, when we see just injustice and standing for it, there's a consequence to that choice. That choice leads to Ran, a covering on our hearts that eventually acts like a veil. And that's a problem. That's a problem. It's scary. Our decisions and our actions have consequences, and they are immediate. They build up over time. And the way to polish the heart is to stop the sin and seek Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's forgiveness. Repentance. Repentance. This is why repentance is so important. It's not just because akhirah. Yes, of course akhirah, we know that. But it's also your immediate self now, because the harder the heart, the more it's covered, the more you're not going to see the truth, the more you're going to fall astray, and it gets worse and worse. I think I shared this story before, and it's scary because it could happen to any of us. My wife had a teacher, a Quran teacher, an Islamic teacher, when she was growing up, and after we got married, we went to this restaurant, and I looked at her, and she had like she looked like she was basically saw the angel of death. And I asked her, what's wrong? So when we sat down and she collected herself, she said, I just saw my former teacher, Murabbiya, in a miniskirt, no hijab, full makeup, walking out of the restaurant. Complete shock. Say, subhanAllah, how did that, somebody who used, and she was, I think, a niqabi at the time too. How does that happen? How does it go from some point A to point B? It's scary. We cannot feel we're immune to that. We can fall into that very easily. And this is why this concept of Ran, stain of the heart, needs to be understood. There are consequences to our choices. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, كَلَّا بَلْ رَانَ عَلَىٰ قُلُوبِهِمْ مَا كَانُوا يَكْسِبُونَ, by which they earned. So your choices have consequences. كَلَّا, again كَلَّا, indeed, or negating of what these people used to say. إِنَّهُمْ عَنْ رَبِّهِمْ يَوْمَئِذٍ لَمَحْجُوبُونَ. That these people, subhanAllah, this ayah actually is just, it shows you the justice of Allah. إِنَّهُمْ عَنْ رَبِّهِمْ, with their Lord, يَوْمَئِذٍ, on that day, لَمَحْجُوبُونَ. There will be a veil between them and Allah. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala punishes or deals with people the way they dealt with others. So if these people put a seal on their hearts and they covered it with their actions, then on the day of judgment, they're sealed from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The consequence in dunya and akhirah, because of our choices. Now, وَلِلَّهِ الْمَثَلُ الْأَعْلَى وَبِلَا تَشْبِيهٍ. To Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala belong the best examples, and this is not to associate these examples with Allah, but just to give you a glimpse of this feeling. Who has siblings here? Imagine a time when you were younger, maybe now, and you know, you're sitting with your siblings, your parents walk into the house, and they give salam and hugs and how are you to all of your siblings, and they don't even look at you. How would you feel? These are your parents. How would you feel? Not a nice feeling. Everybody got it, and they walk out and as if you weren't even in the room. وَلِلَّهِ الْمَثَلُ الْأَعْلَى. On the Day of Judgment, imagine Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Between the person and Allah is a veil. And Allah, وَلَا يَنظُرُ إِلَيْهُمْ يَوْمَ الْقِيَامَةِ وَلَا يُزَكِّيهِمْ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't even look at them on the Day of Judgment. How does that person feel? Consequences to our choices. إِنَّهُمْ عَنْ رَبِّهِمْ يَوْمَئِذٍ لَمَحْجُوبٌ ثُمَّ إِنَّهُمْ لَصَالُو الْجَحِيمِ. And then after that, they're going to be led to al-jahim, to hellfire. وَالْعِيَاذُ بِاللَّهِ. ثُمَّ يُقَالُ هَذَا الَّذِي كُنْتُمْ بِهِ تُكَذِّبُونَ. And it will be said to them, this is what you used to. تُكَذِّبُونَ again. What you knew was true, that you're going to be taken into account, that everything is recorded, that you're going to be accountable for your choices, and you rejected it. And there's a reminder. And this is again a part of the punishment. Because punishment on the Day of Judgment, وَالْعِيَاذُ بِاللَّهِ, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect us from it, is not only a physical punishment, it's psychological. It's the regret feeling. Anybody here felt regret at some point in their life? It probably hurts more than physical pain. It eats you alive inside. That's a punishment on the Day of Judgment. It'll be reminded, this is what you rejected. This is what, even though the signs were clear. إِذَا تُتْلَى عَلَيْهِ آيَاتُنَا. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, we gave him reminders, we gave him ayats, signs. He rejected them, she rejected them. Asatir al-awwaleen, tales of old. The reminder comes on the Day of Judgment. Any questions so far on what we've covered? You rejected. So you rejected to the point you convince yourself that it's not true. It's not that you're sitting back and saying, yeah, some people are like that. Yeah, this is true, but no, you've lied to yourself to say, when it came to you, you recognized it was the truth, but you didn't want to accept it. So to reject it, it's very difficult for the human to do something wrong and they know it's wrong. Before they do something wrong, they have to often justify it to themselves. For example, I have an excuse. Or, yes, it's wrong, but my situation is different than other people. Right? They justify it to do it. That's how humans are. It's hard to say, this is wrong and I'm going to still do it. It's hard on the conscience, so they justify it, until the point they start lying to themselves and they say, no, this is not the truth, even though they knew at one point it was. Okay. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but I remember in Sunnah, like it's similar to the definition of kuffar, kafirin as well.
Kafirin is more on just to cover up truth.
Oh, okay.
You're covering up the truth.
But you also said,
but this is, I mean, you can cover something up, but it's not that you recognize that it was, right? Takdeeb is to actually recognize it was, and then you reject it, right? Kind of like lying. Lying is a form of it, like, when you're lying, you know you're saying something wrong, right? But you're doing it anyway. It's more a specific example. Any questions so far? Yeah, and in our context, I gave the extreme example of what's happening in Gaza and people justifying killing of innocent people, but it could even go to the point where just on everyday level, right? So someone's heart is stained, they stop recognizing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's blessings. So you'll see people complain, you'll see people, I don't want to say clinically depressed, because I'm not talking about medical here, I'm talking about they feel down, they're not happy with anything. And you look at them, subhanAllah, they've got a house, they've got livelihood, they got family, they have health. What's the problem here? It's scary because then these people feel down. And again, I'm not talking about medically, clinically, right? I'm talking about they're feeling down. but you have all these blessings, right? You have all these ni'am. You're a Muslim. You believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's a ni'am in itself. And perhaps that their heart is stained, that they stop recognizing blessings of Allah, and so they feel down. Everything they see is negative. They stop seeing good. So these are the effects, consequences of our actions on the day-to-day, and so we have to be careful of that. What I will talk about very briefly, excuse me, the concept of, our thoughts lead to emotions, emotions lead to actions, actions strengthen thoughts, and it's a cycle. Thoughts to emotions, emotions to actions, actions strengthen thoughts. So it's important to talk about this because we need to understand how we can break the cycle, because the cycle leads to more and more covering of the heart. So if you have a negative thought about someone, that will lead you to emotionally feel ill towards that person, which means that would lead you to mistreat that person. That mistreatment might start building even more negative thoughts, right? And more negative emotions, and then more negative actions, and it continues. Again, this is towards a person, but it could be just as any sin, right? A thought to do a sin, the emotion is initially, guilt, regret. You do but you say, you still do it. It strengthens that idea in your mind. It quiets down that guilt, and it continues the cycle. It's hard to control emotions. And so we talk about the heart, right? The Prophet ﷺ said, there is a piece of flesh in the body, إِذَا صَلَحَتْ صَلَحَ الْجَسَدُ كُلُّهُ, that if it's good, if it's sound, the whole body is sound. And if it's corrupt, the whole body is corrupt. أَلَا وَهِيَ الْقَلْبُ. The Prophet ﷺ described it, this is the piece of flesh, is the heart, right? So if it's good, the rest of the body is good. Why? And this is the cycle I'm talking about. If the heart is good, if it's pure, it's going to command, the heart is the governor of the body. The Prophet ﷺ just taught us in this hadith. If it's good, the rest of the body is good. The heart commands the limbs to do actions. It has an emotion that leads to action. Has anybody heard of that description that most people make choices or decisions based on emotion, right? When you go buy something, it's not, I'm hoping there's logic to it, but oftentimes we make emotional decisions to buy and sell, for example, right? Emotion, controlled by the heart. The heart controls all the limbs. So if the heart desires something, it commands the hand, the eye, the ear to do things. And so to break that cycle, we have to target the consultant to the governor. If the heart's the governor, and if it's good, the rest of the body is good, and if it's evil, the rest of the body is evil, the consultant is the mind. The consultant is what tells the heart, like this or hate this. Right? It convinces the heart. It consults with the heart. And so we want to change a bad habit or a behavior, has to start with us reflecting, thinking about it, changing our perspective. The Prophet ﷺ said, قال رسول الله عليه الصلاة والسلام لا يؤمن أحدكم حتى يكون هواه تبعا لما جئت به. Nobody of you will believe until their hawa, their desire, is aligned with what I came with. Right? So how does that happen? It's a thought process. It's a thought process. You have to think things through and convince yourself. If I was to tell you right now, give money to charity, right? What Joe off the street will see that you're losing money. You've given away money. Your account is less, right? So you have less money now. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran tells us, when you give to charity, that doesn't happen. You increase. Allah increases you. So you may rely on, say, logic, oh, I've lost $10 because I gave it to Islamic Relief. But Allah says to you, no. Those $10 are actually multiplying. You're going to get a lot more in dunya and akhirah. So the logic is switched. And how do you understand that? How do you command your limbs to give in the sake of Allah? The heart has to like it. How do you convince the heart? The mind has to tell it. Actually, it's not, you're not losing money. You're gaining, right? You're gaining. And so the mind has to interrupt that cycle so that the heart doesn't get covered up with the ron that we're talking about. Okay? I thought that's, it's kind of important just to talk about, because we have to try to apply these ayat in our life. Okay? So inshallah ta'ala, we started 10 after 8. So inshallah, I will try to finish up in the next 10, 15 minutes, bi'idhnillah ta'ala, and before 9:30, bi'idhnillah ta'ala, should be finished the surah. So let's continue reading the ayat. Okay. كلا إن كتاب الأبرار لفي عليين وما أدراك ما عليون كتاب مرقوم يشهده المقربون. Okay, so now as we said, we started, the first part, not the first part, but one of the parts in the surah, كلا إن كتاب الفجار لفي سجين. Now we're saying no, right? إن كتاب الأبرار, the book of الأبرار, لفي عليين. وما أدراك ما عليون كتاب مرقوم. So indeed, the book of الأبرار. Now what's أبرار? You guys know what fujar is, so the opposite of fujar is what? Good code of conduct. Abrar, remember, abrar comes from bir, right? Bir al-walidain. What does bir al-walidain mean? You have good conduct with your parents, right? So again, this is not talking about a belief system. This is talking about a code of conduct, behavior, right? Now, of course, belief guides behavior. We're not differentiating between the two. If you have belief in Allah, but you have poor code of conduct, that's an X, right? If you don't believe in Allah and you have excellent code of conduct, that's also an X. If you have no belief and poor conduct, well, that's completely for sure an X. The goal is to have belief and good conduct. So the book of people with excellent code of conduct, إن الأبرار لفي عليين, إن كتاب الأبرار لفي عليين. Their book is in عليين. And وما أدراك ما عليين. And what is that place? It's in a place. Where is that place? The answer again, similar to, it's the exact same answer. كتاب مرقوم. It is a book that is recorded. It's written. And it's stored. No one's going to touch it. No one's going to change it. No one's going to delete it. It's stored and it'll be passed to you perfectly the way it was recorded. كتاب مرقوم يشهده المقربون. And this is beautiful. And it will be witnessed by those who are close to Allah. Imagine on the Day of Judgment that may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala write us amongst them. You are one of the abrar and your book is given to you in front of all of those who are close to Allah. The prophets, the messengers, shuhada, the people who died for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. All these people that are very close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you're being recognized in front of them. If you're recognized in front of the masjid, right? That's, we don't do things for recognition, but just the feeling, right? On the Day of Judgment, you should feel proud. Dunya, you shouldn't feel proud, you should be thankful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. On the Day of Judgment, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes people who are successful. They're read my book, no problem with that, right? You feel good on the Day of Judgment when you're presented your book that's recorded in front of the closest people to Allah. يَشْهَدُهُ الْمُقَرَّبُونَ. So again, the concept of your deeds are recorded. Whether you're fujar or abrar, it's all recorded. And this is the message of this surah. Let's continue bi'idhnillah ta'ala for sake of time. إِنَّ الْأَبْرَارَ لَفِي نَعِيمٍ على الأرائك ينظرون تعرف في وجوههم نضرة النعيم يسقون من رحيق مختوم ختامه مسك وفي ذلك فليتنافس المتنافسون ومزاجه من تسنيم عينا يشرب بها المقربون. Okay, so we talked about abroad. Now we're talking about the people who had excellent code of conduct, and their book is going to be stored in Illiyin. And what is Illiyin? It's going to be a book that records everything, and it'll be witnessed on the Day of Judgment by those who are closest to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And just to kind of emphasize the point that we talked about last week, who's doing the recording? Kiraman Katibin, right? We talked about the description of the angels in Surah Al-Fitar last week. Kiram, they're noble. Somebody who's noble doesn't add anything, records exactly what you did. They don't add to it, they don't take away from it, and they don't change it. They're kiram. They write. Okay? يَعْلَمُونَ مَا تَفْعَلُونَ. They know exactly what you do. Now, these next ayat are extremely beautiful. One thing about the Quran is that when it describes Jannah in terms of dunya. Why? So we can understand. Because if it's just descriptions of Jannah, and we have not, the human doesn't understand something unless they experience it, right? So if I tell you, let's say you've never had chocolate, and I'm talking about chocolate, that means nothing to you, right? Okay, chocolate. What's the big deal? I don't know what it is. I've never tasted it. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when describing Jannah, He describes for the most part things that resemble things in dunya, right? So al-anhar, there are rivers in Jannah. Well, you understand mentally what a river is. Now, is it the same river? I'm sure it's not, because it's more beautiful. But you at least understand that there's rivers. And there's rivers of ma'in ghayri asin, right? There's water, and there's asal musaffa, and there's milk, and there's pure wine. These are things that here are in dunya, right? So you relate to them. These descriptions in Surah Al-Mutaffifin are of Jannah, of things that we haven't experienced. And it's not often that happens. And there are terms, again, that Mufassirin are trying to interpret, but we don't know if necessarily this is the right interpretation. Because these descriptions are not things we have in dunya. Okay? So, إِنَّ الْأَبْرَارَ لَفِي نَعِيمٍ. Indeed, the abrar, again, the people of good code of conduct, excellent code of conduct, لَفِي نَعِيمٍ. What does na'im mean? Does anyone know what na'im means? Most of the time, na'im, people think it's referring to Jannah. The abrar are in Jannah. It's not talking about Jannah here. Of course, Jannah is a na'im. But it's talking about na'im means luxury. Luxury is not only an akhirah thing, it also means dunya. But we're not talking about material luxury. We're not talking about the kings and the palaces and the wealth. We're talking about an eternal luxury, where somebody feels such at ease. A difficulty comes, they understand that this is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's plan, and they're content with it. And oh Allah, whatever you bring to us, it's we're happy, we're satisfied, we're content. And by the way, what I'm talking about now means different than 3 weeks ago, because 3 weeks ago is more abstract. The more and more you watch the interviews of the people in Gaza, you see it on their face. All of what's happening, and they're complete. I'm not leaving from here to Jannah, and I'm completely satisfied with what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wrote for me. So how do you get there? Subhanallah. They're abrar. Inna al-abrara la fi na'im. This luxury is not only in akhirat and dunya. And so this is talking about the consequences of our choices. عَلَى الْأَرَائِكِ يَنْظُرُونَ. Right? So they're in luxury or bliss. عَلَى الْأَرَائِكِ يَنْظُرُونَ. By the way, this bliss is not only also material bliss, it's an intellectual bliss, it's an emotional bliss, right? It's on every level. Spiritual bliss. عَلَى الْأَرَائِكِ يَنْظُرُونَ. Ara'ik is thrones. يَنْظُرُونَ, they're looking. They're looking. Okay, so the bliss is a physical one, where you're ala al-ara'iki, you're reclining, you're relaxed, you're comfortable, you're not running after things and scrambling and stressed, complete luxury. Of course, now we're talking about akhirah, right? Ala al-ara'iki yanzurun, and they're looking, and there's also a luxury in looking, right? Beautiful things. I don't know who likes to see the ocean, but whenever somebody sees, whenever I see the ocean or mountains, my heart starts to feel at ease and peace, right? Ala al-ara'iki, and they're Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is describing them as yanzurun, they're looking. And what are they looking at? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't say. He says, ta'arifu fi wujuhihim nadrat an-na'im. You know from just looking at their faces, you can see the brightness and this luxury on their faces. Nadrat an-na'im. It's expressed. I don't know if you guys like, looking at people's reactions. A lot of people do. When they're surprised or when something good happens, you want to see how somebody reacts, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is describing to us, when you look at that person in na'im, in luxury, whether in dunya, when you see this expression of people who are content, or akhirah when they're reclining, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is describing, you can see that luxury on their faces. تعرف في وجوههم نظرة النعيم يسقون من رحيق مختوم. And this is what I'm talking about. That the description of akhirah, can we relate it to something in dunya? Maybe, maybe not. يسقون من رحيق مختوم. They will be given, يسقون, not يشربون. يشربون means they will drink. يسقون, they're going to be offered drinks. They're going to be basically served. يسقون من رحيق مختوم. رحيق. So the word rahiq we use as, nowadays we use as like nectar. More generally, it could mean pure wine. It's a description of a pure wine. But again, this is just the ijtihad of the mufassirin. Right? So, يسقون من رحيق مختوم. مختوم means a seal. So either that drink is stamped and sealed and nobody's opened it before, or that, مختوم is, ختامه مسك, that it's, the ending, basically the stamp of the luxury is that you will get a fragrance of misk. ختامه مسك. Or the drink itself smells like misk. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, so again, these are descriptions of things that we try to, we think we understand, but they're descriptions, again, in akhirah that could be completely different than what we know. وَفِي ذَلِكَ فَلْيَتَنَافَسِ الْمُتَنَافِسُونَ. And indeed, in this, for this, the competitors shall compete. And I want to take a few moments to talk about this. فَلْيَتَنَافَسِ الْمُتَنَافِسُونَ. Now, tanafus in dunya, competing in dunya, means I'm first place and I don't want anybody to be first. I'm first place. We're all racing and there's a winner. And there's second and third and so on. The understanding of Islam as a believer is not, I want to win and everybody else is second and third and last. فَلْيَتَنَافَسِ الْمُتَنَافِسُونَ is that as a believer, somebody wants everybody to be successful. In what way? You want everybody to race you. You want to befriend people who are racing to do good deeds, and you want them, of course, everybody wants to gain the ajr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but the fact that they beat you to it does not make you upset. It actually makes you happy. Why? Because you're not looking at it as an individual benefit. Because when you're racing for yourself. But if you're competing in Islam, the competition is a collective one. If somebody beats you and you're good and you've trained and they beat you, you're happy. Why you're happy? First, because you're happy for your brother or sister, that they can accomplish well. But second, that you know that Islam is being served by other people that are better than you. There's a collective advancement. The whole ummah is better when we're racing and I don't necessarily win and somebody else wins. That's good for the ummah. The more we can compete against each other, not against, but with each other, the better it is collectively. It's like a basketball team that has one player that that only is selfish and plays for themselves, and as long as they score all the baskets and the team loses, it doesn't matter, I'm successful. But that's not how a team wins. A team wins when everybody contributes, right? So the whole team, when their score is above the other team, no matter how well you did, you tried your best, but others played better than you. That's fine as long as the collective won. And that's what we're talking about here, the competition in Islam. Collectively as an ummah, are we doing well or not? Okay? That's how we have to look at competition. وَفِي ذَلِكَ فَلْيَتَنَافَسِ الْمُتَنَافِسُونَ وَمِزَاجُهُ مِنْ تَسْنِيمٍ. And this again, description is based on some of the tafsir. Mizajuhu means it's mixed. It's a mixture of tasneem. Again, what is tasneem? It's a description of something in Jannah that's luxurious. All we know is it comes from a ayn. Aynan yashrabu biha al-muqarrabun. It comes from ayn means a fountain or a spring from which those who are close to Allah will drink. Okay? So tasneem, ayn, rahiq, we don't know what they are, but we know that they're a luxury of Jannah. We know that they're a luxury of Jannah. Okay, let's finish the surah inshallah with the last few ayat. إن الذين أجرموا كانوا من الذين آمنوا يضحكون وإذا مروا بهم يتغامزون وإذا انقلبوا إلى أهلهم انقلبوا فكهين وإذا رأوهم قالوا إن هؤلاء لضالون وما أرسلوا عليهم حافظين فاليوم الذين آمنوا من الكفار يضحكون على الأرائك ينظرون هل ثوب الكفار ما كانوا يفعلون. We started the surah with an example, al-mutaffifin, right? A double standard. People who have a double standard, and that's a choice that people make, right? And then we talked about the theme of the surah, which is everything is recorded and it has consequences, dunya and akhirah. The surah ends with a final example. It talks about إِنَّ الَّذِينَ أَجْرَمُوا. Ajramu is somebody who is mujrim, who commits crimes, essentially. إِنَّ الَّذِينَ أَجْرَمُوا كَانُوا مِنَ الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا يَضْحَكُونَ. So a lot of people, when you say what's the opposite of amanu, they say kafaru. Except, it's not to say that's not right, but also Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala teaches in the Quran that the opposite of iman also means fujur, ajramu. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in different surah actually combines these two terms, ajramu and amanu, right, as opposites. Okay? So ajramu are people who basically transgress boundaries and they commit the crimes or things that exceed those laws and boundaries. إن الذين أجرموا كانوا من الذين آمنوا يضحكون. They used to laugh at them. Remember the concept of double standard. Okay. By the way, is anyone on this earth that you know that likes to be made fun of? No. There's not one person that says, "Oh, make fun of me. Go ahead," right? And they laugh and they enjoy it. Nobody likes to be made fun of. Keep that in mind. إن الذين أجرموا كانوا من الذين آمنوا يضحكون. So again, ajramu comes from mujrimin. So these are people that are missing, belief, and they have poor actions and poor ethics. Let's put it that way. One element of these people, mujrimin, again, no belief and poor ethics. One thing in common that they have is that they ridicule people. Sukhriya. Okay? They ridicule people. So that's one element of these people of ajramu. They laugh at those people who believed. وَإِذَا مَرُّوا بِهِمْ يَتَغَامَزُونَ. And then when they pass by them, يتغامزون means either they wink or they poke. Have you ever seen somebody says to their friend, oh, look at that person, and they start laughing. Look, 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 right? They poke them and they point, right? And they start laughing. So وَإِذَا مَرُّوا بِهِمْ يَتَغَامَزُونَ. And so when they pass by them, it's a form of ridicule, right? They wink or they say, look, 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 and they all start laughing. وَإِذَا انقَلَبُوا إِلَى أَهْلِهِمْ. And when they return to their families, انقلبوا فكهين. They come back. Fakihin means the kind of lightheartedness. Okay, it's a better word than lightheartedness. Kind of joking. Okay, jokingly, right? So if they go back to their families, they come and they're laughing and they're in amusement and they're jest. Okay. Not nadimin. They don't go to their families nadimin in regret of what I laughed at someone, I made fun of someone. No, they go back and they're laughing and they're joking and they're making fun of the situation. وَإِذَا رَأَوْهُمْ. And when they see them, the believers, they would say to the قَالُوا إِنَّ هَؤُلَاءِ لَضَالُّونَ. Those people are misguided. They're backwards, right? They're backwards, and they make fun of them. Is this ringing a bell, by the way? Is this example somebody making fun of someone and saying they're backwards, and they go back to their own people, not necessarily their families, but their people, and they say, "Oh, look at these, these people are, they're living in, a different era. They're, what the word is being used now, animals, right? And they're making fun and they're making jest." How is this related to mutaffifin? Nobody likes to be made fun of. Yet they're willing to dish out these insults. They're willing to laugh at people. But when it comes to people laughing at them, they won't take it. See the relationship? وَإِذَا انقَلَبُوا إِلَىٰ أَهْلِهِمْ. They don't turn back and oh, you know what, I feel bad. No. Fakihin. Lightheartedness and injust. And then they, not only that, they will go beyond that and they'll say, these people are backwards. And Allah's answer to that, وَمَا أُرْسِلُوا عَلَيْهِمْ حَافِظِينَ. And you were not sent to them as a watcher. Don't put people down. Your job is not to watch people and ridicule people or put them down when they do something. Your job is not to label them as backwards. وَمَا أُرْسِلُوا عَلَيْهِمْ حَافِظِينَ. You're not put in charge of people. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not assign you as a watcher over people. And so this is the message I spoke about earlier, that when we read the Quran, we don't go read the Quran so that we can go tell people what they should be and should not be doing. We should be reading the Quran for ourselves, because وَمَا أُرْسِلُوا عَلَيْهِمْ حَافِظِينَ. We are not created to be watchers over other people. We are not created to be watchers, because that's also a form of double standard. Right? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ends the surah and says, فَالْيَوْمَ الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا مِنَ الْكُفَّارِ يَضْحَكُونَ. And on that day, it's the reverse. It's the reverse, because there's no double standard on the Day of Judgment. Something happened to you, you get that right back. So on the Day of Judgment, فَالْيَوْمَ الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا مِنَ الْكُفَّارِ. Now it's kuffar, because kuffar is a general term that includes fujjar and includes fasiqeen, includes all sorts of people. So on that day, the believers will be laughing at the kuffar. عَلَى الْأَرَائِكِ يَنْظُرُونَ. Again, عَلَى الْأَرَائِكِ, while they're reclining and relaxed. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ends the surah with a rhetorical question. هَلْ ثُوِّبَ الْكُفَّارُ. ثُوِّبَ is recompense. It comes from thawab. Al-kuffaru, again the general term that includes people that are fasiqeen, mujrimeen, that are all lumped together in this general category. هَلْ ثُوِّبَ الْكُفَّارُ مَا كَانُوا يَفْعَلُونَ. Did the kuffar get recompense for what they used to do? That double standard, that not believing in accountability and that things are recorded. Last thing I'll close with, inshallah ta'ala. So this is a rhetorical question. SubhanAllah. Trying to remember. So maybe next time, inshallah. I was coming in with a point, and Yeah, so we'll end it here with the fact that, people, again, there's consistency. There's going to be somebody laughing at someone. If you laugh at people in dunya, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, وَمَا أُرْسِلُوا عَلَيْهِمْ حَافِظِينَ, you will be laughed at on the Day of Judgment. The laughter is consistent. Who's going to be doing it is what's different. And so we need to really focus on ourselves. We really need to understand that our actions are recorded and they're stored, and there's consequences to our actions. Every day we have either a stain or a polish. Ask yourself, these actions, oh, it's a small sin, it's a small lie, it's a small, it adds up. It adds up to the point, like I mentioned earlier, that a person was going from teaching Quran in modest Islamic dress to somebody who is pretty much not dressed at all in a few years. This can happen. So we need to be careful of the consequences in dunya and, of course, in akhirah. I hope that was beneficial. Inshallah, next week we'll start right after Isha at 8 o'clock. Please put your name, because we're now taking attendance, and we'll record it, inshallah ta'ala, going forward. So please put your name that you're here. If you attended last week, so maybe I'll just put, so this is October 31st, last week, the 24th, and then the week before that is the 17th. So put a check mark under the name if you are here, or you attended last week's online session. If you didn't, no problem. You can still listen to it, bi'idhnillah ta'ala. Assignments. I only received 2 assignments. If you're a credit student, can you put your hand up? Okay. Did you guys submit your assignments?
Yeah, I did.
Okay.
I wouldn't expose myself.
Okay. I put you on the spot because it was due on Monday, or Sunday, I forget, 29th. So make sure, inshallah, if you haven't submitted, please submit. And I think we'll have more information about the exam shortly, بإذن الله تعالى. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك وصلى اللهم على سيدنا محمد